Ntshona, we're discussing ways of growing South African tourism. Now, Mr. Ntshona, I want us to come back now to domestic tourism. I'm sure when you arrived at SA Tourism, you had similar cries or concerns being expressed that a lot of South Africans find it difficult to tour our own country because it's more expensive. Is it?
Look, again, it's never a simple binary answer. There's a lot of factors on the go over there. Just to kind of give you the context is that most economies around the world have a very robust domestic tourism sector and then overlaid by international one. We are the other way around. So very weak on domestic but much stronger on international. It is something that is certainly we want to change, and accessibility is definitely one of them. Affordability is also quite key as well. So when you start to add up all of the elements that are there, from the accommodation itself, from the travel, from the actual experience itself, it can add up to a tidy number. The issue, however, the reality is that our trade, which is basically the people that run businesses in the tourism sector, has simply over time never focused quite considerably on domestic tourism. They're more focused on international tourism. So you've got a sector that is more outward-looking than inward-looking. So there is very few products or places that have been deliberately built or established with a domestic tourist in mind. And that's something we want to change over time, because until we can make it price affordable, we can make it accessible as well, we're still going to be in this very difficult environment that we're in.
What are the operators within the tourism space not doing? Or maybe put differently, how do other countries or jurisdictions do it?
Well, they've got very different issues that are there. South Africa is one of the world's highest Gini coefficients. The gap between the haves and the have-nots is very wide. So you actually start to look at the population that actually is the target audience for actually traveling domestically. It's actually quite small. And what you find that those that can afford to travel are actually traveling quite a lot. They're actually traveling quite often. The problem becomes is that the gaps of have-nots is going wider and wider and wider. So contextually, within the wider audience, it's a small portion of people that travel. Secondly, as well, is that businesses are profit maximizers. They will look for the highest return that they can find. And essentially, they will rather chase the dollar, the pound, and the euro over a rand that they may have to negotiate on. And then lastly as well is the sequencing, is we tend to all go on holiday at the same time. So therefore, we are all chasing that one room. And you can just imagine what happens to that price. Also added to that one, you also go on holiday at the same time that the international tourists also go on holiday. So therefore, they bring in the stronger currencies, and that's where things go out of kilter. So there are deals, there are opportunities for people to travel, but you got to spot them, you got to choose them quite well. Travel off-peak. Don't travel, peak season, because you pay peak season prices. Secondly, as well, is go off what you call off the beaten path. There are other establishments besides hotels that you can use. There are lodges, there are B&Bs, etc., that you want to bring through so that people have access to them and actually start to use them.
But why should it be my baby or my responsibility? What if I don't want to go on a holiday or something? Is it not the responsibility of those who are operating within the space to actually make you want to go on holiday and actually make it easier for you to see that it's better to do it during this period than a peak season or than when the dollar people are here?
Yeah, and that's where now the almost evolution of the sector is coming through, to start to realize that actually there's a lot of opportunity in domestic tourism. Previously, that was never appreciated. And I think slowly starting to see even some of the bigger players starting to look at domestic tourism as a play. You start to look at the bigger hotel groups that actually start to recognize that they can also have an opportunity there. It's turning slowly. I compared to banking 10, 15 years ago, where people thought there's no money to be made at the bottom of the pyramid. Guess what? The Capitex of this world came through and they're minting it. So similarly, starting to see now, the paradigm shifting that says there is opportunities, there is volume to be made over here at the right price point, at the right experience as well.
Okay, I don't know who is doing it better than others, but I'm assuming places like Durban do or fare better in attracting tourists than other cities or towns. Am I correct?
Actually, Limpopo is the number one in terms of domestic tourism.
Now, what do they do there that other people are not doing?
Well, for a source market, Gauteng is a wealthier province relative to other provinces. So that becomes quite a lot in terms of finding the visitors come through. Proximity, 45 minutes drive in Bela Bela, that's Limpopo as an example, right? And then you also seen the improvement of the highway between here and Polokwane. So you see that traffic go up and down. 2.5 hours drive you in Limpopo, as opposed to Durban, a 5-hour drive, So that Durban is a close second coming through. So top three is Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and actually KZN.
So you've just touched on infrastructure again, that someone else has to provide to make life easy for a person who wants to go to whatever destination.
Oh, absolutely. So when there is a service delivery protest outside a toll gate, in KZN, that's actually got nothing to do with tourism, but impacts tourism fundamentally. Because if you can't have access, if you can't have mobility, basically, then you can't get through. And I think those are some of the things that are actually interrelated. Better infrastructure that we have, the more user-friendly or easier it is for people to travel, the better the experience becomes as well.
Is crime still a big issue? And I'm talking here about both domestic and foreign, for both domestic and foreign tourists.
Safety and security is definitely an issue. It's not unique to South Africa, by the way. However, the perception globally and even domestically is that, safety, crime is something that is really top of mind of people. So when people don't feel safe, they rather stay where they are staying, where they live, as opposed to travel. Similarly, and it's not just also crime on body, so meaning that if I leave my house and I travel to Cape Town, there's actually also crime happening in the house that you leave behind as well. So people rather stay in their own houses to actually look after their own investments as opposed to travel as well. Again, this is where now we need safety and security to come in and play ball, to say, well, how do we make sure that we have an enabling environment where people feel safe to move, where people feel safe to move freely, whether it's the time of night or even area as well. The department is doing some work within that space where they actually are deploying a program called Tourism Monitors. And what it is, it's an EPWP program where we will be deploying, physical warm bodies across tourism destinations that we know that are frequented by the most, and these become your eyes and ears in terms of alerting tourists to any potential issues, but also when they spot stuff, they can also alert the police as well, who can actually have the opportunity to arrest or impede potential crime.
What about the role of municipalities? I know like a couple of cities I want to mention. One of them is where I was born, where new projects get started, municipalities or provincial governments fund them, and within no time they're in a bad state. No tourist, local or international, can go there anymore. Or you have communities that say, because we are not benefiting from this, let it die.
You've hit the nail on the head there, is that when people feel excluded, they destroy. But when they feel part of something, they protect it. And it's essentially that until the benefits, the impact of tourism can be felt by ordinary people, then they will start to protect it. And the same could be said even amongst rhino poaching, as an example. So when the community around the parks don't have a vested interest in those rhinos actually being protected, the opposite happens. So it is in making sure that as we grow this sector, and it's a growth sector, by the way, we have to include people in that can play a role within the tourism space. So if you know that you run a restaurant and the buses that stop at that attraction actually give you, footfall coming to your place, you have a vested interest to make sure that, there is safety and security happening in the area over there. So it's never one-dimensional as well, but we need the state, we need police to play their role, but also communities as well to also protect the tourists. Because, when, especially internationally, when a tourism incident happens, it makes bigger news in the source market than in South Africa. So when a Chinese tourist gets hurt or is killed or is a victim of a crime, it makes big news in China, in the newspapers, and we have to spend all the time to actually undo all of this. So it becomes counterintuitive as to us driving to this side, but at the same time now it leaking out on the other side.
Now, well, you're running this organization. It's in your interest that you make a success of it. What are the things that you believe are beyond your control, but would help the sector a big deal would unlock its potential if they were to be done and done right and done now?
Sure. So the president talked about doubling the number of jobs in the tourism sector. And our view, certainly my view, is that no one creates jobs. Jobs become the consequence of growth. So we've got to grow the sector. So essentially, it's important that we grow the sector. In order to grow it, you need a couple of key things. The first one, remove unnecessary barriers. Tourists have a choice. They have a choice as to where they can travel. And therefore, the more barriers you have, the more obstacles you have, basically, these are the things that inhibit people to make sure that they come to your destination. The second one is effective.
Let's be practical. What are you talking about? Are you talking about permits? Are you talking about visas?
I'm talking right across the board. I'm talking about visas, and I'm talking about unabridged certificates. I'm talking about our ports of entry. Bait Bridge is an example. It being user-friendly for people to move through and not have to queue up for 5 hours. You'll choose the other port that gives you 30 minutes flew through, as an example. It talks about airline connectivity. The more airlines, the more flights we have between destinations, the easier it is for people to come through on the other side. We talk about also...
Well, speaking of which, didn't South African Airways cancel its China route?
Yes. They used to fly direct route between Johannesburg and Beijing.
Why was it not profitable?
I'm not too privy to the reasons that are there. I think the issues of SAA, where do you want to start? There's just so many things happening over there. I think they're in a difficult space where they have to make some really tough decisions. And almost, even if the route is profitable, but which one is more profitable than the other?
But even there, if you're losing 17%, of that of the market that you used to have, it's a big deal. Something you should be taking up with all the stakeholders. One would imagine SAA would be part of them.
Absolutely. So we have what we call an airlift strategy, and this is where us as SA Tourism get together with Airports Company and also the provincial tourism body, as an example. So the flight of BA into KZN is a result of that effort. We've also managed to convince Alitalia to resume the route between Rome and Johannesburg as well. Cape Town, there's a lot more direct flights flying to Cape Town than previously as well. So this is one of them. It always becomes a chicken and egg as to, does the airline come first or does the demand come first? So we sit behind it and say, we assure them that we will bring the traffic through as long as they bring the equipment that allows them to do that side.
Ntshona, that's where we're going to leave it for this evening. Well, best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for coming through. That brings us to the end of tonight's edition of As It Happens. My name is Vuyo Mvoko.